So we're talking with John Kruth, and where and when were you born?
Well, grew up in Pittsburgh, and I was born in Pittsburgh, and I grew up in the 60s and 70s in Pittsburgh, and then went away to school in Philadelphia in the 1980s.
And I'm interested in people's astrological sign.
Oh, well, my birthday's next week. I'm an Aries.
Ah, I don't have very many Aries people in the profile. Do you?
Well, I trust you will have a strong example of an Aries today.
How so? Do you? I take it you identify with being an Aries.
Yeah, it seems to be when I read characteristics, they seem to match me pretty well.
What are a
And
few characters?
I tend to very much group with other Aries as well. We recognize each other, it seems.
What are some of those characteristics of
One
Aries?
is, and I mean, I don't feel like I'm like tooting my own horn or something here, but natural leadership qualities. It seems that every job that I have, whether I like it or not, I end up in a leadership role and managing projects and positions. Also, very active. I'm always running around and doing things. It seems that I'm doing more things than most people around me most of my life. So that means I have to relax really hard too.
How do you relax?
Well, I have different ways that I go about it, but most of the time, I'll oftentimes spend a lot of time alone because I tend to most of my professional life and most of my interactions, social life, I'm with many people. So I kind of recharge by going back and being alone and spending time alone and just kind of getting my own thoughts together and gathering my energies. Um, but I also relax very well by being around friends and spending a lot of time together, and whether we have dinner together or go out and have drinks together. I'm not the kind of guy to go out rock climbing or something like this, but I do like to spend time with people.
So on the Myers-Briggs, that means you're probably an ENTJ.
No, no, I'm an FP. I'm an ENFP. Does that work? ENFP?
I don't know how P's manage to be managers because they don't like lists and boxes and following rules. So how does your penis allow you to be organized and structured and do budgets and that kind of thing?
Yeah, you see, now you're hitting on different things here, right?
Mm.
Because when you're a manager, one of the first things that you have to consider is people and the people you're with, and that's very much related to compassion, understanding, and working with them rather than ordering or using people for different processes and things. But when you work with somebody, a lot of times that gives you the opportunity to kind of help them to learn more and develop themselves at the same time providing something that can benefit the organization. So here at the Rhine, a lot of time I learn, I'm the executive director. What that means is when something doesn't get done, it means I have to do it. And so I end up running around and learning things because I want to be able to support the organization and keep it going. And being able to, I guess because of the way that I've been able to work with people, I feel very comfortable working with people. They tend to seem to like working with me too, for the most part, at least the ones that stick around. And because of that, we end up being able to succeed and get things done together. So.
The ENFP is the most common profile of everybody that I've interviewed. That's the most numerous one.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
And it makes sense because they tend to be innovators and out of the box kind of thinkers who aren't afraid to be nonconformists. I'm also asking people their birth order.
Yeah, well, I'm in the middle.
So you're two of three?
No, there were six kids in my family. My mom and dad were Catholic. And so there were six of them, and six of us all together. And I have twins that were just behind me, so I'm like right in the middle. There, an older brother, an older sister, and then three younger siblings. But I'm dead set flat in the middle.
The reason I'm asking about birth order is one scientist had a theory that that he called them rebel scientists tended to be later born, but that's not what I'm finding. The majority of people are firstborn, which is another theory that they tend to be achievers.
Mm-hmm.
And these are people with graduate degrees for the most part, like you.
Well, okay, let me just expound on this just a bit
Please.
then, because my older brother and my older sister they're a bit 4 and 8 years older, and then there were 4 of us that were born within 4 years, and I'm the oldest of the small group, of the younger group.
Ah.
So I'm in the middle of the whole group, but I'm the oldest of the youngest group. So I'm not sure how that fits in, or if it does at all, but.
How did your mother cope with being pregnant and having those many babies in 4 years? Wow.
Yeah, well, I told you I had my younger brother and sister are twins.
Yeah.
So a year after me, there were twins born, and then 2 years later was my other brother.
Was she a stay-at-home mother, and she could just devote her time to the kids?
Well, yeah, this was the '60s, and so when we were growing up, that was the case. But my mom also, she died when we were very young. So when I was 10, my mom passed away, and so my dad was left with 6 kids at home at that point in time. My mom's family was a very strong Catholic family, and very strong Italian family as well, and so there was a lot of support from the other people in the family at that time. So I ended up being raised by, my grandmother, my aunts, my sister, and my dad, of course, doing what he did as well.
How did that impact you to have your mother die when you were 10?
Yeah, a lot of people ask about this because I know that there's a lot of theories around trauma with young children and how these traumas can really spur people to start exploring other avenues. It wasn't quite like that with my family, though. And definitely it wasn't like that. I didn't get that feeling at all. Mainly because and we hadn't gotten to this yet, but I was kind of raised in a family where these phenomena were happening from the time I was very young. Different types of spiritual experiences, ESP type things. We didn't even call it that. It's just how we kind of communicated with each other. We were always having these sort of connections and experiences, and the idea of survival after death, and things, this was natural to me growing up. And so when my mom passed, she wasn't around, but I didn't feel like she was gone.
And did you
I still feel like she's gone.
Did you feel her presence? Did she come and say hello?
Definitely spent some time with her, yes. Mm-hmm. As did other members of the family.
And what was her message, and how did she convey it?
Oh, we had lots of conversations. I mean, there wasn't just a message. Like I said, it was a very normal way of communicating. It was very normal, so it wasn't something. Sometimes it would be in dreams, but sometimes it wouldn't. Sometimes it'd be, like be out doing something, and I'd hear, stop, don't do that, go this. Not like in a chastising way. It's just like as almost like a warning. And I tend to, because of these experiences, I still listen to my instincts quite a bit, and I follow my impulses because I trust them, because I feel like I am being guided in ways.
Oh yeah. Where did that come from? Those comfort with psi experiences. I mean, because I don't associate it with traditional Catholicism, because you're supposed to have an intermediary of the priest or Mary or something. I don't think they like direct spirit-to-spirit communication. Correct me if I'm wrong.
No. I think in the way the church speaks, you're exactly right. Exactly right. But in my community, in my family, it was, and if you go to other places where Catholicism is very strong, Christianity is very strong, you'll sometimes find that there are integrations of different cultural aspects that allow certain people to have these abilities or these skills to be able to communicate, to be able to heal, to be able to help other people to understand where their problems are coming from. And that ran in my mother's family. So my mother had been trained in this, and my grandmother and her mother and her mother, going back for generations.
So it was an Italian thing.
Yes, very much.
And how how did they call it? Did they call it like the second sight, or what did they refer to it as?
Um, we didn't really, it was really just living for us. It wasn't something special or unique or different. It was how we lived. Now, my grandmother, she did healing with people. She would do healing, and my mother did healing with people as well. And so I can remember sitting in my grandmother's kitchen, when I was a little kid, and we'd be eating toast and breakfast, and someone would come over, and they would gather in my grandmother's kitchen. Someone would come over, and they'd start talking to her in Italian, and I didn't understand Italian. Or maybe I did at that time, but not very well. But he'd speak to her for a while, and then once they spoke to her for a bit, she would just say, okay, she'd just sit back, and she'd start thinking. And then they would say, thank you very much, and they'd leave. And I remember turning to her and saying, what did you just do? And she looked at me, and she said, what do you think I just did? And this is how I started to learn. I started to learn to perceive and started to understand what was going on. And it wasn't just me, with all of my brothers and sisters in the family who were curious. And we all became curious at a certain point. We were asking questions and learning from observing. So it was a normal thing for us growing up from the time I was a very small child. So this idea of, and things like, I had a dream about Aunt so-and-so who passed away. And, what do you think that means? And I'd hear, well, what do you think that means? Here's how you can deal with this, and here's how you speak in these situations. So.
And have you thought of yourself as a healer as well, like your mother?
Yeah, I grew up as a healer. In my family, this was very common that we would do healing work. Not everyone feels like they're doing healing work. One of my sisters is just remarkable. She has a magic touch. But there's a number of us who do healing work. And so this is where my research focus is strongest, is within healing.
And do you mostly use intention like your grandmother, or do you do hands-on as well?
My own approach to it has changed quite a bit over the years. And I think any healer who has done it for any period of time, their approach changes over a number of years. At first, it was very intentional, it was very directed, very focused, and I found through time that I was working a lot harder than I felt that I have to. And now it's a bit more allowing. I allow more. I don't know if you spoke to Bill Bankston at all, but Bill has a technique that's very interesting because it's completely unintentional. You set an intention, but then when you're actually doing the healing, you don't even think about it anymore. You just allow whatever happens to happen. And we have a group here that's been meeting at the Rhine now for 6 years. Every week for 6 years, the same 8 people have been coming, which is a remarkable achievement in and of itself.
Yes.
We've been coming and meeting every week, and we actually learned Bill Bankston's method 6 years ago. And we've been practicing it together and doing it. And we oftentimes have conversations about what that method is, how it's changed for us. Everybody coming from different backgrounds. Some people coming from Reiki, Qigong, from healing touch, some from religious healing. I come from what I call a cultural healing background. And some people who had no experience with healing at all. And we all sat down and learned the same technique, and we continue to work together. So we talk oftentimes about how it's changed us over time.
Bankston, I wasn't clear, but he said something about you keep your mind really, really busy, and I'm not sure quite what the technique was.
Cycling, he calls it.
Cycling. What is that?
That's one of the conversations we often have in the group, trying to understand exactly what it is. The way Bill describes it, Bill Bankston, the way that Bill describes it is you choose goals that you want for yourselves, targets that you want for yourself, and you get very strong impressions of what they are. Sometimes you visualize them. Sometimes you actually just develop them into a feeling, and you continue to move from one to the other, going quicker and quicker and quicker until it eventually seems like you're not doing anything at all because it's going so quick. But you're going through this cycle of all of these different things, up to 20 items, sometimes more, sometimes less, but up to 20 items you can go through so quickly that you could not possibly be imagining them or seeing them. But they develop into a feeling. For me, and it's different for everyone, how they experience this, for me it turns into a tapestry that becomes like a tapestry of a life that then I can see, or I can experience it and feel what it's like to be in that life. Once I'm there, that's when the healing happens. I don't make the healing happen now. I let it happen.
So
that's one of the approaches that I take towards when I'm personally doing healing right now.
Just to finish with that one, so let's say Mary comes in and we're working on her gallbladder problem. But when you're doing the cycling, you're thinking about John's goals, not Mary's gallbladder.
Yeah. So just for example, I might be thinking about, having, like some people talk about having a new car, having their house renovated, very personal things, having a lot of success in their business or their career. And so these personal things are what kind of start the cycling. But once it's cycling, those things completely disappear too, and it just becomes this almost an optimal imaginary view of what life can be. And I don't think about someone's gallbladder at all, or whatever it is.
Right.
Actually, that's not part of the process. Somebody comes in, Mary comes in and asks about her gallbladder. I don't care about that. I honestly don't. Not that I don't care about her,
right,
but I don't care about what she has a problem with. I want to know, if it were all better, what would you be doing right now? That's what we want to see. It's completely goal-oriented towards where you want to be, not trying to... It used to be when I started, I have to fix that broken piece of the machinery, but it's evolved from there, and now it's a different technique. I think Bill's technique is one of the more advanced healing techniques that I've encountered.
I have two thoughts that come to mind. One is that by doing the cycling, it keeps your left brain busy. So you could be doing, my phone number is blah, 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 my address is blah, blah, blah. It just keeps your left brain, so your whole brain and your unconscious can work on the issue. And then the other thought is, if you're thinking about positive goals, that sets a kind of template or field that the Healy can kind of match the positive stuff.
Yes, I think a lot of people discuss it in terms of getting your logical or slow thinking processes out of the way and allowing your fast thinking processes to take over. To me, it's much more emotional. It's much more feeling based. Because once you get the basic technique down, you're not thinking about cycling anymore. It's a feeling for me. So, but like I said, different people experience it different ways. This is just the way that I've experienced it.
Do you have an example of a healing outcome as a result of your group meeting for 6 years? I'm sure you have.
Yeah, healing is something, defining what healing is a very important thing for me. Because people look at it in so many different ways. It's obvious if someone has a, sprained ankle and they get up and walk away, then there's a physical healing going on. But sometimes we have people who come in they're on their, I don't have anything anywhere else to go, so I'm coming here to you. And sometimes it's not about physical healing. Sometimes there's other aspects that are very important to them. Coming to peace with it, finding a way to emotionally deal with it, end-of-life issues. And so it's not always physical healing, and yet I think there is healing going on still. It's just not always as apparent. But when we first started, after about 6 months of practicing, learning, listening to the tapes and reading the books and trying to learn the technique, we got a feeling we were doing pretty well. And we said, well, maybe we ought to try to work with someone. And so one of our group members volunteered. And we set up a situation where he could lay down on a table with some pillows and padding and things and got him very comfortable. And he said, I've been having sciatica problem for the past 7 years. He said, it just keeps getting worse. And he said, it's gotten to a point now where he's a dancer. He's a ballroom dancer. And he said, it's gotten to a point now where I can't dance.
Oh.
And this was like a joy that he had in his life. And he said, he goes, it hurts me when I sleep all the time. And so if you guys can help me with that, it'd be great. And so we were like, we don't know what we're doing, but okay, we'll try. And so we took our approach to this and said, okay, so I guess we're done. And he got up and he said, it seems to be feeling a bit better now. And then that was 6 years ago. He hasn't had a recurrence of it since.
Beautiful.
And so this is something that really kind of made us feel like, wow, there must be something to this. It's had an effect, and he's dancing, and he's having no pain. And this is something that had gone on for years with him, and it disappeared in one session that quickly. Now, was it his belief because he was trying to learn the technique as well? Was it something that happened within the group energy? Was it something that somebody in particular had an effect on him? All of those things, we can't really answer those questions, but the end result is there was a benefit to him.
Absolutely.
And he felt better because of it. So this was after 6 months. We did this, and we were like, okay, well, it looks like maybe we might be able to help some people if they're interested. They want to volunteer for our research project here. Maybe they can be part of it. And we realized just a couple months later, we didn't know what we were doing 6 months before. Even though we thought we had it all figured out, we didn't have any clue. Things changed so much and so quickly. And they continue to change within the group. How we approach things, the different roles that people take. And so part of my research is also related to the experience of being part of a healing group and doing what we call qualitative research on this. So we can talk to each other and learn from each other and help other people to learn more about what it's like to be in a healing group so we can take this information and maybe build on it and understand better what healing really is.
Have you tried doing long-distance healing?
We oftentimes do long-distance healing, yes.
And positive outcomes just as much?
We had one situation where there was a woman who was about to go into knee surgery because she had a mass behind her knee. And we did a distance session with her the day that she was going to the doctor to have the surgery done. And they did a last examination of the knee, and the mass was gone.
All right.
So she ended up not having surgery. Now, was that because of us? Was it? I don't know, but this was a distance session that we did at the same time. So I consider these sort of very extreme examples of things that have occurred that have been beneficial for people.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I'm not working with mice and doing very controlled experiments like this. This is more of a, let's work together and see if we can help people and at the same time learn something about the phenomena.
The placebo effect tells us that what we believe or the suggestion that's given to us is very powerful. So the medical profession has known about placebo for ages, but somehow doesn't get the significance of it.
Right. Well, from my perspective, if our group is doing nothing but activating a placebo response, it's doing some great stuff.
Yeah.
Because it's helping people. And I may not be able to turn it into something where I can measure an energy, but if it's helping people, however it works is good enough.
Yeah.
We have had some people who weren't really aware, like the woman whose knee we were working on. She knew that we might do something, but she wasn't really engaged in the process at all. Didn't know we were doing it that day.
Oh.
So the placebo effect definitely could come into play, especially when someone knows what you're doing. I'm comfortable with that.
Yeah. Well, it just means that that mind and thought and intention is very powerful.
Oh, yes. Very
Yeah.
powerful.
Before we leave your childhood, um, did you study psychology at university? What did you choose to study?
So originally, when I was at University of Pennsylvania in Philadelphia, and I studied philosophy.
Mm.
I studied physics, and then I quickly changed to to psychology that I studied for a few years, and that then ended up studying philosophy. And I went back later and I studied psychology research and analysis methods. That's before I came to parapsychology.
Mm-hmm. And then after you had your master's in psychology, how did you use it to earn money?
Well, I'm still trying to figure that out.
I mean, what did you do for work?
There's a lot of ways I could have, but you know, when I did it with an intention to uh, do research in parapsychology. That's the only reason that I studied psychology research and analysis.
And where was that? I mean, were they interested at all in parapsychology?
Well, you know, I studied at a university called Capella University, and when I was studying with the professors I was working with, I was able to convince almost every one of them to let me do all of my research projects with parapsychology literature. Well, I would go to them and I'd ask them, and most of them would be, as long as it's professional literature, as long as it's peer reviewed and it's good research, fine, you can do it. And so I used that for all the evaluation and all the analysis. There was only one class where I got some issues with that, but I eventually won that teacher over as well. Because I was lucky because I was able to study the research techniques and the analysis methods, but do it in the context of parapsychology as long as it was available. When there was no parapsychology available, I studied traditional psychology. So,
Did you write a thesis?
no, I didn't have a thesis when I wrote for
You
the
did a comprehensive exam.
yeah for the masters.
Yeah.
Yes. Mhm.
And then how did you get to Rhine Institute?
Well, it's Rhine Research Center.
Research Center.
Yes, and I came to the Rhine. Well, I moved to Durham because the Rhine was here. I moved to Durham in the 1980s, over 30 years ago now, because the Rhine was here. And it took me about 20 years before I actually walked through the doors and came in. And it was, you know, I'd been walking up and down the street. I knew where it was, and I knew how, you know, I knew I walked by it constantly. I'd walk up and I'd say, hey, there it is. And I never could bring myself to walk through the door. And then I went back to school. I got my degree in research, and I was like, okay, it's about time now. And so I met Sally Rhinefeather, who was the executive director at the time, and John Palmer, who was one of the researchers, and they invited me to a research team meeting, and well, here I still am, 10 years later.
What were you reluctant? I mean, 20 years is a long time to not venture through the door when it's your main interest. What was the inhibitor?
Well, you know, I told you I follow my instincts.
Yeah.
I let my impulses kind of lead me, and I really walked up on the stairs, touched the doorknob, and was like, I can't go in there. So, um, there was just something that wouldn't let me do it at that point in time.
It just wasn't the right timing.
Apparently, and you know, I spent a number of years, and I spent a lot of that time learning management skills, and then I studied technology, and I worked in technology for almost 20 years. So these were skills that were really needed when I actually did walk through the door. If I had come through earlier, I might not have developed those skills.
That makes sense. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I'm asking people because I think it's useful for readers and listeners. What are the most difficult challenges you faced in your life, and how did you cope? Not just professionally, but any kind of challenge.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's, you know, there's always been some struggles to I studied philosophy. There's not much need for street corner philosophers these days, so I was always trying to find a way to make my way and figure out what's next. And so I tended to take some less than traditional paths often, where I'd be trying to, try this work for a while, try that work for a while, and doing different things. As I mentioned, I ended up, if I stayed at any place for a period of time, I ended up moving towards leadership type positions. And I haven't always been comfortable with that. Sometimes that wasn't where I wanted to be. I wanted to kind of be the little worker bee, and not always, the king hanging around, and never the king until I got here. And this is really strange. But But I think some of the challenges that I faced was just trying to figure out what's next. Where am I going next? And how do I make the next steps? I feel like I've really kind of had a good path. When I got into parapsychology, it became much more challenging, and mainly because, well, for a few reasons. If you've spoken to a number of people in the field, you might notice that it tends to be an older demographic. And I came into the field when I was in my late 40s, and I was a new guy. And this was after I had been working for many years. I was the new guy, and I am still, in many people's minds, a new guy. And I've been doing this for 10 years. So it's a bit of a challenge in that way to overcome that. At the same time, because I'm at the Rhine, I have a bit of the Rhine carries a bit of weight in the field just because it's been around for so long, and because they know that if I'm here, there's integrity behind the name, and I'm maintaining that integrity, and very careful about that. That's another thing, maintaining the integrity of the organization, because it is such a key, it's a keystone in the field that the Rhine is here, where parapsychology in the academic setting started, was here. And so trying to maintain that and keep that reputation and continue to work in that area, it sometimes prevents me from running off and doing healing of my own, practicing or talking about things that I often don't talk about my own experiences, because I sit in the chair being the Rhine guy. And so when I'm the Rhine guy, I want to make sure that I'm maintaining the organization appropriately. That can be a challenge, but I actually enjoy it because it provides me an opportunity. What I feel like most of my job is being a translator. I'm trying to help. I went back to school to learn the language of science, learn the language of methodology and analysis and statistics, specifically so I could speak to people who understand those words, so I can teach them about the experiences that I've been having growing up, and teach them about the experiences people come here and talk to us about. Talk to them in their language. At the same time, I try very hard to let people know that just because the phone rings and you know who's calling, that doesn't make you psychic. So I try to translate back and forth between the experiencers, helping them to understand what the scientific field says about these experiences, but also teaching the scientific field that these experiences are real, and we have to consider them when we're developing worldview.
Absolutely. Some people find that personal relationships are among the most difficult challenges.
Oh, I don't have that at all.
What do you mean?
I don't have any issues with personal relationships at all.
Do you have kids?
No. Mm-mm. Okay. I've been married a couple times, but it had nothing. None of this. Parapsychology had nothing to do with whether I stayed married or not.
Right.
That was completely independent, because I've been living with these types of experiences my whole life.
Right.
Anyone who ever got involved with me knew about them because it's me.
Right.
So it's not a surprise or anything at that point. So.
Right.
Mm-hmm. In terms of like friendships and things, yes, close friends, they know me. so they know what it's like. It's not like and I have surprised some people, but then we all have that in our lives, don't we? Where sometimes you're talking to someone and there's a surprise that, oh, this person isn't who I thought they were, and so you kind of part ways and go different directions. But I have no I'm very comfortable with people.
Mm-hmm. That's an extrovert trait for sure. What do you find that synchronicity increases as you are more centered on your spiritual path? That synchronicity speeds up?
uh, I synchronicity is a term that people use to mean so many different things. But what I do notice is that there are certain times in my life where it just seems like things are clicking. Like when, for example, uh, this library that I'm in here now, we were going through moving some things around, and I needed to get a desk for a librarian to sit at. And so I was sitting here one day, and I was thinking, well, we really need to find a way. I don't know where I'm going to get a desk. I can, take one of them out of the other offices upstairs, but I kind of want something that's going to suit the library. And within a week, I got a phone call from somebody who worked here many years ago who said, "I'm moving, and in my garage I have J.B. Rhine's old desk
Oh,
that I
wow.
got from his old place. Do you want it?" And I said, "Well, this is a sign, right? It's obvious that I was looking for a desk, and obviously it came to me through, and it's a unique thing. Now we have this really nice wooden desk, and I'm like, boy, I need to get some coasters for the desk because I don't want people just setting their drinks on this nice wooden surface." And someone that I know in Raleigh, just down the road, posted something on Facebook and said, "I'm making coasters in any design." Within 2 days, posted this and said, "If you're interested, send me a note." And I said, okay. So I sent her a bunch of Zener cards, and I said, "Put Zener cards on coasters." She sent them. So now I have JB Ryan's desk with a bunch of Zener card coasters on it. So these types of things, sometimes they just kind of fall into place.
Right.
Whether it happens more when you're on a spiritual path, I don't know. I just kind of notice whenever it does happen that it seems like things are going right, and I'm grateful.
Absolutely. And maybe Mercury's not retrograde.
Yeah, I'm not sure how much Mercury has an effect on me. Mars is pretty strong in my chart, so.
Let's talk about Rhine because the history, because as you say, it's really pivotal and foundational. Do you think it was the first Paris? No, because there were organizations that started in the 19th century, right, in New York.
Right, over in UK, the SPR, Society for Psychical Research, was doing work back then, but JB brought it into an academic setting, into a university setting, and actually established a laboratory at Duke. Now there was some things that were done. There was some stuff done at Stanford. There was a little bit of work done at University of Pennsylvania, actually, some at Harvard. None of them really made. They were more like research projects that would last for a few years and then disappear. It was kind of somebody got funding, they'd do some research, but JB established it as a department and continued to let it grow. It was successful at Duke for 30 years as having a laboratory at Duke, starting in 1935. By 1965, JB had reached what they had at that time was called mandatory retirement age. He was 70 years old. When you were 70 years old and a professor, you had to leave your job at that time. And so his decision at that point is, well, do I leave my work at the university, where he knew that the existing psychology department wasn't going to support it? They had changed into more biological basis of behavior, got into conditioning, and he knew that his work wasn't going to be supported in that organization.
We used to call that rats in cages.
Right, yes. And that was very popular in the mid-60s through the 80s. It was very, very popular. And they still do it today. But he decided at that point to take a step off campus. He got independent funding and started what he called the Foundation for Research on the Nature of Man. And also part of that was the Institute for Parapsychology. that is the previous evolution of what we now call the Rhine Research Center. So going back to the 1930s and maintaining that academic rigor for the first 30 years at the university, publishing the Journal of Parapsychology, maintaining the highest standards related to research and related to using the latest analysis techniques. Probability and statistics were really just developing in the 1930s when he was doing this, and he was using the latest technologies at that time and developed a lot of new ideas. So he was very well respected because of his pivotal role and the success that he had. The field looks to the Rhine to maintain that same level of integrity now. And I do everything I can to continue to participate in the latest scientific research work, to continue to provide integrity for the field. This is one of the things, we run the Rhine Education Center, which is an online school where we teach people the science of parapsychology. We don't teach people to be psychic, but we have professional researchers who are the professors, and they teach online, so we have students from all over the world who are part of this organization, and we teach them, we have certificate programs to teach people to become parapsychologists. It's pretty unique. There are people who have programs, well, they'll have maybe 20 different researchers talk online over a period of a month. There are, at universities, you might have 1 or 2 courses in parapsychology. We have a complete program. Everything from introductory courses to research methods, qualitative, quantitative research, analysis techniques, and ways to research each of the individual phenomena that we study. So it's a complete system, including history, anthropology, everything we can put into it.
How many certificates have been earned? Do you have track in your mind?
We have different levels of certificates. And the school started 7 years ago now. The certificate program started 4 years ago. We have a number of people who've gotten the introduction to parapsychology who've taken that and gotten a certificate for that. The more complete academic certificate, which is 14 courses or so, we haven't had anybody get all the way through that yet, but we have some people making good progress towards it. So
nice. Which are the most farthest away countries that your students live in?
It literally been all over the world. Africa, Australia, all over Europe, Asia, and people in India, and I've had students in Alaska, Hawaii. I mean, literally all over the world, South America. And some of the students that we've had go through our programs, even if they haven't completed the program, it was a jumping off point for them. And now I see them at conferences, they present at conferences, they're doing research work, and it makes me feel like we're making the little parapsychologists. Remember I told you this is a kind of aging field. The more younger people we can bring in, the better. And that is one of my primary goals in this field. I
really concur with that. Most of the people that I've talked with, a lot of them in their 70s, 80s.
Yes. Yes, I told you I was 48, and I was the young guy.
The new guy.
And I think this isn't right. We need to do something about this.
Yeah, no, that's really important. How did Rhine get interested in? I know Louisa, his wife, was, and then Sally, his daughter, was. How did he get involved in the first place?
So, here's the story, right? In the 1920s, there was a man who came to the United States named Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, who wrote the Sherlock Holmes mysteries. And he was speaking, not about Sherlock Holmes, but he was speaking about work he was doing with the Society for Psychical Research over in the UK. He came to Chicago and gave a talk on work he was doing with spiritualists and mediums. J.B. Rhine was at the University of Chicago, and so was his wife, Louisa Rhine, at the university. They were both PhD botanists, and J.B. went to this talk and saw him speak. He was so excited and so impressed with what he heard, he went home and said to his wife, I think that we might be able to study this in the laboratory. He was always trying to find a way to balance his spiritual views with scientific work, and he couldn't find a way to do it, and he said, maybe this is the avenue to take. So he started to communicate, being in academia, he started to communicate with different people around the country who were studying this, and he got in touch with a man at Harvard named William McDougall, who was running some research and looking at mediumship work. And JB said, well, maybe I can start to work with this as well. Well, McDougall said, I'll tell you what, I'm going down to this place in North Carolina where they're starting a new university called Duke University. They want me to be head of the psychology department. Maybe you can come down and teach psychology and we can talk about this more. So in 1927, as the story goes, JB and Louisa took their last $300 and got in the car and started driving down to this little town in North Carolina. And when they drove into town, Louisa looked at JB and said, you brought me to a town that doesn't even have a bookstore. And we've advanced since then. Now, it was a very academically oriented area, but back then it was just a little crossroads, and JB came and started studying mediumship in the context of psychology department. Became really clear to him as he started to think about it that in order for him to tell whether a medium was communicating with spirits, because this is what they say they're communicating with spirits and giving you information from spirits. Mostly mediums at that time, it was entertainment. They were doing seances and candles and trumpets would fly across the room. A lot of it was entertainment, but what he found was some of them seemed to be getting information they shouldn't know. So were they getting this from spirits coming and speaking to them, or was it possible that they were actually getting this information from the person they were with? Telepathy, mind-mind communication. Or maybe they were getting information about objects, like if this person who passed away, their library and their materials were at the house. Maybe they were able to see this from a distance, remote viewing or clairvoyance. Or perhaps in about a half hour, the person sitting with them is going to tell them everything there is to know about the person who passed away. And they're able to see that through time, precognition. And he said, before I can tell whether there is actually a spirit there speaking, I have to know, can people do these other things? Telepathy, clairvoyance, precognition. What are the limits of human ability? And so he started studying these phenomena and found that they happen. It never made him say, oh, the spirits don't exist. But he said, we can't demonstrate this in a laboratory until we first find out what the limits of human ability are. Fortunately or unfortunately, he never found the limits of human ability related to these things. He never was able to make the jump to spirit contact. But also, that means our abilities, well, we haven't found the end to them yet.
It's not Louisa, it's, how do you say her name?
It's Louisa.
Louisa. Was she a professor too?
She was a PhD botanist as well.
But
and so when
they
moved, at the University of Chicago when they were there.
Yeah.
And then when they came down to North Carolina, she took the role of being the loyal housewife and raising the kids, and sitting at home over a number of years and raising Sally, Rhine Feather is one of them, raising the kids and taking care of them while JB went and did his important work at the university. Well, of course, there weren't many people that he could just speak to about his work because people didn't understand it, so he would talk to her about it. And obviously, she was a very bright and intelligent woman, and she started to get a little bored of what she was doing, and it got to a certain point that she was like, is there something I can do? I want to do something to help the lab once the kids got a little older. And so JB said, well, we get correspondence from all over the world, and I don't know what to do with it. People send letters, and I try to answer everything. I just don't have time. Would you be interested? She said, great, give them to me. I can do them at home while I'm watching the kids and stuff. I can sit and read them. So she started reading and answering the letters, and as she started reading them, there were reports from people talking about their own psi experiences. And so she started being a botanist. What do botanists do? They classify things. They make taxonomies. So she started making a taxonomy and started classifying these events. And she wrote a number of books based on the experience and the reports that she got. She started doing interviews with Reader's Digest and writing articles, drawing people to send more reports. And over the years, she had tens of thousands of reports that had come in. And we're still collecting reports today. Now we do it electronically through the website, where we have people go there and they just report an experience. And we have people here who collect them, read them over, and we're trying to maintain some research around this.
Mm-hmm. And then how many children, and was just Sally the only one who went into parapsychology?
Yeah, I don't want to tell you wrong information about the family, because I know that she had Sally had an older brother, and she had a younger sister, but I think there were some other children in there as well. I don't know them though. But her older brother, Sally's the only one who went into research, and she's the only one who really worked at the lab and did consistent. She got her PhD in psychology and did research, published in journals. She also, of course, as any child would, had to get away from their parents' business for a while, ran off and did some counseling work, did some other things, and then came back again. And she still comes over here quite a bit. She's 89 years old now. She's active as like anything. She's very, very busy, and constantly staying in touch with people in the field, because it's just how she lives. So, but yeah, she's done a lot of research. Some of the research she did was related to memory back in the 1960s and 70s. She did some research related to animal psi as well. And, specifically what they call trailing. Whenever animals would follow their owners when they left and moved to a new location. Animals that would find their way home from a long distance. There was one really famous case where this cat, Clementine, the family was up in New York, and they were moving out to Colorado. And the family couldn't take the cat with them, so they gave the cat away. And a little boy in the family was really heartbroken by this. They gave the cat away to somebody else, and they moved to Colorado. Months later, a cat shows up in their yard that looks just like Clementine, has same markings, has same hip dysplasia issue, and they did some research to ensure that there were markers that this was the same animal. They found out that the cat had run away from the owners in New York where they left him, and all of a sudden there was a cat here. So it was an amazing story of trailing, how the cat this is somewhere the cat had never been before. It's one thing to find their way home, but the cat had never been there before and showed up in the yard and seemed to be the same cat. Now, the ironic part of the story is the family couldn't keep the cat anymore because someone was allergic, so they had to give it away again.
Oh, no.
But this is the type of research that Sally was looking into, and, animal psi is a very interesting topic.
It is, because there's no placebo or suggestion going on. It's just raw.
Not that we know. Right.
Interesting. Where else do you look to for excellent research in psi? What other institutions? There's IONS. There's...
Yeah, well, there are a number. Well, with IONS, they're doing very specific research with deans out there, and Julia Mossbridge was working with them. She's still doing some. She's still associated with them a bit. And Arnaud, who's been associated with them, have been doing very good work out there. University of Virginia, UVA, has Ed Kelly and Russ Dunseith. Ed and Emily Kelly and Russ Dunseith are up there, and Jim Tucker are up there. Jim Tucker is, of course, looking at children who remember past lives, following up on Ian Stevenson's work. Russ Dunseith, I mentioned him because he is looking at, he has an EEG lab that he's working with up there, and oftentimes I don't have an EEG lab here. So when I have someone come in here and I think that they might benefit from some EEG work, I send them up to Russ at UVA, who works in the Department of Perceptual Studies up there.
What about in England?
Oh, well, when I think of the United States, those are the two main areas I think. There are isolated researchers in other places in the United States who work independently, but associated with the full research institute. I know Julia Moss. Oh, well, let me also mention Windbridge.
Yeah.
I'm sure you spoke to Julia Beischel. There's Julie Beischel and Mark Bacuzzi. They're doing some of the best work, I think, in the field, period, flat out. And Julia Mossbridge is also trying to develop a research institute as well. And so those are the people I look to whenever I look to good research. There, of course, are Christine Simmons Moore, who's down in University of or West Georgia University.
Yeah.
Yes. There are other isolated people around the state.
Gary Schwartz, University of Arizona.
Yes, right. And then if you look worldwide, of course, there's people all over the place. There's good research going on in Japan. There's research going on in Italy. Of course, in India, they're continuing to do research there. France has the Institut Metapsychique, which is it's the oldest operating lab in the world. They're having their 100th anniversary this year, and the PA conference is going to be there this summer in 2019. They're doing the most of that research over there is related to mind-matter interaction, PK, psychokinesis type things. And then in UK, there's a number of different centers at universities where they have a funded chair, the Kessler Chair, which Carolyn Watts holds over in UK. And Chris Rowe, of course, he was president of the Parapsychological Association. He's a department head and has quite a few PhD candidates who have worked with him, and he's graduated PhDs. So he's bringing more people into the field as well. I'm sure I'm leaving people out. And so this is because we are diverse, we're spread across the world. I often tell people, I'm probably one of the top 100 parapsychologists in the world. And it's not because I'm so good, it's because there's probably like 110 of us. There aren't many of us around. It shows in the progression of the research. A lot of people say, well, if you've been studying this for so long, why aren't you really making progress? Well, there's so few of us. If you look at any other academic program, any other field of study, there are graduate students who want to get involved all over the country, and they're required to get involved for their academic programs. We don't have that in parapsychology. I have to find volunteer researchers who are interested, and then I have to work around their schedule. I can't ask them to come in and find when I'm available and do things. I have to work around their schedule if I want them to really get engaged in the field. So this makes it more difficult to do replication. We can't, graduate students are well known for doing replications. They help to support the whole field by saying, I've done this, it worked, or did this, it didn't work. We don't have that facility here. So we're always chasing new things and trying to catch up on some of the old things and adding little twists to it. So, because it's difficult to get funding for replications too. That's one of the other issues within our field.
How does the Rhine get funded?
It's privately funded. Everything is privately funded here. Occasionally I have grants that I'll pick up for research projects, but more than anything else, we have donations, we have memberships, and then when we have special projects, sometimes we have some very nice people who will help us to advance the projects.
Are they tax deductible? Are you set up so that they can take it off their income tax?
We're a nonprofit organization.
Oh, good. Yes. That helps.
Yes.
Okay, let's talk about your research. We have a whole list of psi phenomena that you've been involved with. So let's just go down the list. Energetic healing methods. So I'm assuming that's Reiki and Qigong and healing touch, that kind of.
Not particularly.
Oh, okay.
So let me structure it a little differently than just going down a list.
Okay.
I told you one of my interests is healing. And related to healing, I'm interested in how different people approach it. I mentioned Bill Bankston's method before. That's very different than the cultural method I learned growing up, and there are other types of techniques as well. Looking at all of these different techniques that people use, looking at their experiences, my belief is that there is an underlying commonality between all of them.
Mm.
There is something that is consistent between all of them, and I'd like to be able to find what that is. When parapsychologists, when I look at the literature, I see people either saying, I'm studying healing touch, I'm studying Reiki, or I'm studying healing, but it's not defined what that really is. It's not clear what it is. I want to try to explore it in more detail and understand what is it that is really implementing the healing for these people. What are the common themes we hear when we talk to all of them, and what are the common practices they use? How do they prepare? What are their belief systems? And when they actually do express it, what tends to work better than other things that are being done? Why are some people more successful than others? You can look at pretty much any field and find the same thing, but this hasn't been really explored in detail related to healing. And that's one of the things I'd like to be able to do, is understand more about what that healing process is. Now, once we understand the experience of healing, what's effective and what seems to not be effective, then we have to figure out, how does it work? There's things related to the psychology of the people who are doing it that you can look at. You can look at their physiology. I was telling you about Ross Dunsey, who looks at EEGs. You can look at this as well. You can look at different physiological markers, and you can look at the effects that people are having. Still, that doesn't get us to the point that we can know exactly what is happening. Can we measure anything? So one of the things that one of the labs that I have upstairs is the bioenergy lab. What we do in the bioenergy lab is we look for, I have a physical factors lab where we look for any physical activity that occurs that can be measured, either on people or in the environment around people when they're having psi activity. The bioenergy lab is a component of this. The bioenergy lab is what we call a double dark room. It's a dark room, a black room, that is closed off from outside light, inside of another room that's closed off for outside light. It's because it is really, really dark in there.
Yeah.
We have in there, we're measuring light, very low levels of light. There is a light called biophotons that emanates from any organic matter. All it is, it's not magic, it's ultraviolet light. You can measure it with an ultraviolet light detector, but very low levels of ultraviolet light that comes from any organic matter, whether it be people or animals or plants, or even we had red blood cells. And if you take red blood cells and you put them in front, if you drop a little bit of saline on them, they'll pop. What we found is as we did this, as the cells popped, we could see light coming from in that room. This idea of biophotons, back in the 1970s, it was crazy talk. Nobody believed it. Nobody thought it was important or real. There's a man named Fritz Popp who was over in Germany, who revived some research that was done back in the 1920s and started looking at whether ultraviolet light came from, he was looking at organic fruits and vegetables versus things that were grown not organic, trying to see if there was a difference. And he found there was a difference in the amount of ultraviolet light produced. Still, people didn't care about this. They said, well, it's light. Why do we care about light? Well, he continued his research, and now it's become part of upper-level biology courses. In the 1970s, people thought it was nuts, but now it's being taught to PhD candidates at MIT, at Stanford, over in Japan, Italy, all over the world. This has become, and of course Germany, where Fritz Popp was from, it's becoming very high-level biology. None of this is parapsychology. But what we study here is a little bit different. We try to determine whether people can actually change or affect the amount of light that's produced. So what we do is we have this dark room using standard physics and engineering equipment. It's called a photo multiplier tube. It will measure a single photon of ultraviolet light every half second. Extremely sensitive piece of equipment. When I have my room completely closed off and have all the equipment cooled down and ready to go, in that room I'll measure about 3 to 5 photons a second. No light at all. It's dark in there. If I bring a person in, doesn't matter who it is, anybody, and sit them down in front of the machine, that number jumps up to about 12 to 20 photons a second. We glow. All of us. We have natural glow in the ultraviolet range. So this is an amazing thing just in and of itself. But what we do is we'll have people come in, and I'll have people who say they're healers. I don't measure them, but I just say they think they're a healer. People who are martial artists. People who do a lot of meditation. Bring them in and sit them down and say, okay, let us take a baseline where you don't do anything first. And then, after we have a solid baseline of what the environment's like, we say, start your healing. Sometimes remote healing, sometimes there's someone in the room. Start your martial arts forms. Do your meditation. And we try to look and see if there's any variance from the baseline. About 90% of the people that we bring into the room, we get no change.
Wow.
We get baseline.
That's
Continued,
surprising.
no change at all.
Oh.
But with about 10% of the people, I'm seeing variations from the baseline. Now, like I said, 12 to 20 photons is what I count, which is very low levels, but it's there. I'll see that jump up to 80. That's big, 4 times the baseline. I'll see it jump 200, 3,000. Some people will go into the hundreds of thousands, and I even had 2 people go over 1 million photons a second.
Wow.
You don't need statistics to know that there's something unusual going on from it. If I just leave that room sit, that never happens. The equipment doesn't vary that much. But it happens when there's someone in there intentionally doing healing, doing martial arts, doing meditation. Now, you might think, well, why is this important? Okay, you're measuring light. Okay, this happens when these guys are in there. What's that mean?
What's important is that it's intentional.
Well, it is intentional. But the other thing is, if you talk to a physicist or you talk to a chemist or something, and you start talking about energy, they're going to say, look, there's potential energy and kinetic energy, right? These people who are talking about energy healing, talking about chi energy, that's none of these. I don't know what they're talking about, but it's not energy. But what we are measuring is light. It's ultraviolet light, which is an electromagnetic energy. We're using standard physics equipment, standard engineering equipment, to measure a standard quantity that is measurable, and it corresponds with activity of healers, of martial artists, and of meditators who often talk about kundalini energies moving through their body. So this is where we start saying, well, perhaps what we're finding is a reflection of chi, a reflection of the energy that people have been calling energy healing and manipulating for centuries. We're actually finding physical measurements of them.
Okay, so the big question is, who are these 10% people?
It varies. You know, it's funny because there are some people who are extremely successful healers, have long clientele lists, and have been doing work and helping people for many years, and I get nothing from them. Nothing. And then I have other people, I've had people go in there and it's like, oh, we're just going to take a baseline, don't do anything, and I start seeing these big jumps. So this is one of the questions I have. How can it's not only that, oh, I can identify these healers, but I can identify that there are certain people who can have an effect that I can measure. And I learn about them.
You can't see anything that differentiates them from the 90%.
Well, yes, I do start to look at different things at this point. So I was talking about the way people approach healing, and whether it's very intentional and very focused, or whether it's more holistic, less more allowing. What I find is the ones who are much more focused, intentional, directed, that tends to be where I see the strong effects in my laboratory. Doesn't mean the other ones aren't doing something.
Yeah.
It means that whatever they're doing, it's not strong enough for me to measure using this equipment that I'm using. But this is a very, so for me, this is all around healing, right? It's all around the experience of healing, the methods used in healing, what's more effective, what's not effective, and then actually measuring the actual energy that's being produced. And so if we can see what the actual mechanism is. So that's what I'm exploring now in more detail.
Are there any gender patterns in the 10%?
I can't say that there are, because I have men and women who have very good effects, and the strongest effects, both men and women. So I can't really say that there's. I haven't done an analysis for gender related to this because it really did not seem significant.
Okay. And there's not more healers than meditators than martial artists in the 10%?
So, one of the really interesting things about Durham, I told you I moved here a long time ago because Rhine was here. And when I moved here, I had already this healing background from growing up. When I came to Durham, I was very surprised. Durham, North Carolina, there are more healers in this area than any place I've ever lived in my life. It seems before I was ever at the Rhine, before I was ever associated with the organization doing anything here, I'd run into people at parties who were healers all the time.
Wow.
All around the area. And I was like, this is Durham, this is what Durham, North Carolina, they come here for some reason. And so I have no problem finding healers to go into the lab and do this work. I haven't found that there's a specific technique that works better, that produces more of an effect than others. I've tried with healing touch. We didn't really see a strong effect. But, and I've tried other people using different techniques. It varies so much. I can't really say that it's one technique. But whenever I work with martial artists, what I find is they have different patterns than the healers. I've looked at these things for so long, watching these little squiggly lines, counting photons for hours at a time, that you start to really recognize. I can almost recognize certain people from their patterns in the data, and martial artists have a very different signature than the people who are doing healing work. And meditators, again, it varies significantly. But I've had people who are mediums in there, in the lab, and certain mediums, when I've had mediums who say they're having contact experience, I oftentimes see biophoton variants in the room. So I don't know if that's coming from the mediums, if it's coming from somewhere else in the room. I don't know. But it does seem to be fairly consistent at this point.
So at this point, all you can say definitively is you get more variations in the photon emission from people who are sending direct, kind of, rather than let it be. They're really focused. They get more photon outcomes.
Well, what I can say definitively is that when people focus their intention, they tend to produce more light than when people are not focusing their attention. Scientifically, that's about as far as I'm willing to go, because I'm conservative related to these things. I could tell you a lot of other stories, but scientifically, that's the limit.
Tell me another story.
So that's one area of research. Another area of research that, when I first came into parapsychology, the thing that I was least interested in is psychokinesis, or mind-matter interaction. I didn't care about it. And then I was sitting in the library here, and we were having a research meeting, and someone came in and was doing PK right in front of the entire room full of scientists.
With a spoon, or what were they doing?
They had a wheel inside of a sealed jar, and they were spinning the wheel inside of the sealed jar. So it was not affected by wind or static or any currents around it, and the wheel was spinning. And not only this, but whenever I asked her to stop, she stopped it. And I said, make it spin the other way, and she made it spin the other way, and I got her to turn it back again. And so she was very, it was very convincing and surprising. Like I said, 11 researchers sitting in the room, she's doing this, and she's following direction. And didn't seem to be a real struggle for her, but later on I talked to her and she told me that it was. Named Shirley Black, she's from Canada, and she spent a number of years refining this technique and making it happen. And so after I saw that, I said, wow, this is really interesting. that someone's able to do this right in front of me. But still, it's not my main interest. I don't really care that much. A few months later, I got a phone call from a medical doctor, and he called the Rhine saying, I have a patient who came to me, and his parents, his mom and his grandmother, wanted me to examine him because he's having effects on electronic equipment. And he was having problems with telephones. When he'd walk by them, the phones would ring. And he couldn't use cell phones. He'd break them all the time. The way they described it, he broke the remote control, he broke the washing machine, all of the computer. They wouldn't let him near the computer anymore. He was having trouble with school, and so all of these things. And so my first thought is, these people, they want to get on TV because you hear all these stories and people see these things on TV, and that's my first thought. So I'm concerned about this because they call the Rhine. We are well known in these areas. So I went and met with the family at the doctor's office because of the medical doctor who called me, because I wanted to make sure that it was a safe environment for them and we could just have a conversation and get to know each other so I could see what their intentions are here. You got to be careful in these types of situations. My first impression after we talked for a few minutes was they were legit, and they did not want to be on TV. They didn't want any publicity. They were afraid, and it was getting expensive because he was breaking stuff, and they wanted this to go away.
Yeah.
And so I said, okay, I'll tell you what, I don't know what I can do, but let me go back and gather some ideas, and I'll contact you, and we'll make a visit. So I came back and spoke to like Shirley, who was doing PK on her own and using these wheels. And I spoke to some other people, Jim Carpenter, who had done work with Tina Resch a number of years ago, who was a very well-known, what they call poltergeist agent, someone who was having effects on objects that were flying around near her when she was a teenager. And there were a number of other people that I spoke to who gave me some guidance and some advice and created a program to go up and talk to this family. And so I took another researcher who'd done poltergeist research, Bill Joines, and we went and we sat with them, and they walked into their house and had a nice afternoon having conversation, and was like, okay, well, what is here? What is he doing? He said, well, whenever he calls on the phone, we always get this noise and he can't use the phone. I won't let him use all these phones. He can only use this one phone in the house. And I said, well, let's do this now. And so they took the phone that they had underneath a big metal pot, because if they took it out from under the pot, it beeped every time he walked by it. So they kept it under a big metal pot because it didn't do it when that was the case. So they took the phone out and he made a phone call to his mom's phone, and immediately it started causing problems with the phone reception. Immediately. I took the phone from him. I could talk fine, gave it back to him, phone reception problems. We saw a number of different phenomena, smoke alarms going off, kitchen appliances heating up when they weren't turned on, a number of these electrical effects on computers, systems in the house that I could measure. Having a technology background, I could measure them and I understood what was going on. This was what we call poltergeist activity, which is unconscious psychokinetic effects. So it's not something that he's doing purposely, but it's unconsciously happening. And typically in the past, it has been recognized to happen at times of stress, anxiety.
Adolescence.
And that tends to exacerbate anxiety and stress in someone's life. So all the hormonal changes and things. So the question was, can we have a way that we can control this and maybe reduce it? And so I worked with him and I taught him some techniques for relaxation and meditation and mindfulness. Problem went away within a week.
Wow.
I don't know if it was because of what he learned or if there was something else, but it seemed very related to the level of anxiety that was in his life.
How old roughly was this?
He was 11 at that point in time.
Wow.
So, yes, and so we were able to measure this and able to see it. So I'm now taking this and looking at this. There's unconscious electronic interference going on. So I start wondering about my bioenergy lab. And I wonder, hey, could there be electronic interference going on in the lab that's affecting the equipment as well? And so I did some experiments within the lab, and I found that, yes, when there were certain people in the lab, I was getting effects whether I was measuring light or not. I was still seeing effects on the machinery. But it wasn't purposeful. The people were trying to do healing, and when they were doing their healing, the electronics were being activated around them. Well, I had worked in technology for about 20 years. It's really well known in computer shops where you're doing software development. There are some people, when they walk in the room, everything breaks. It's Wolfgang Pauli effect. There are other people who walk into the room and everything seems to work better. So I thought, well, is there a way for us to test this? Do this in a laboratory? These were all stories. Everybody knows them when you work in software.
Yeah.
But it was the question, is it real? So I designed a study where I had a network that was running constantly in the background between two computers. And I changed it so that I could capture and tell how many errors were happening in the transmission of data across the two computers. Then I brought people in and asked them to do some tasks on another computer without even knowing the network was there. And I asked them to just perform little tasks like computer games. You know, put the ball in a box, type in this text, match up these little pictures, things like this. Nothing real complicated. Things you would know how to do, find the card in the big deck of things, you know. And so I had them go through and do it, and I gave them a time limit. I said, you have 20 minutes, do all of them, and I'll give you a prize. I'll give you chocolate, and I'll give you a drawing for a gift card, things like this. So I was trying to motivate them. So half of the people, I had them go through and do this stuff, and I was trying to see, well, how many errors would occur in the network while they were there. The network was independent. It was just in the room. If they were developing some sort of anxiety, perhaps it would affect the network if there's unintentional effects. Well, the other half of the people, I had them do the exact same tasks, except I programmed errors into the system. So they'd be typing, and the wrong letters would come up. They'd move the mouse, it would snap back. When they were looking for cards, it'd always be the last one. When I studied software development, one of the things was user interface design to try to make things easier to use. So what I did is I took all the things I learned about making things easier, and I said, I'm going to do exactly the opposite. I'm going to do all the things that you shouldn't do and put it in the software program to make them more anxious. And what I found is the people who rated more anxiety got more errors in the system, even though they didn't know it was running, than the people who didn't establish the anxiety. This is another unintentional effect that we all have. It seems that we all have on electronic systems whenever we get more anxious. So the idea of getting up and walking down the hall, taking a walk, getting a cup of coffee, it's not just because you won't be so freaked out when you come back and make mistakes. It's because your anxiety can actually affect the system. And so by backing off of it, you can really have an effect on it. So all of these things kind of fit together. Like I said, I wasn't interested in PK at all, in psychokinesis at all. But it kept walking through my door. It kept coming. And I follow my instincts, right? So I followed it where it led me. And it's led me now to this point where I'm still looking at what's the mechanism behind PK. Can we explore that in more detail?
Do you call the pair lab at Princeton random number generator studies, is that PK?
Yes, that's what electronic PK, micro PK.
And have you learned things from them that you can apply?
Between what I'm doing and what the pair... I'm sorry, I missed you there. We broke up a second.
Yeah. Have you learned and been able to apply what they did at PAIR to your lab?
Oh, of course. Well, I have one of their random number generators that we work with here as well. But the difference between what they were doing and what I'm measuring here is they were measuring intentional, purposeful changes, whereas I'm more measuring changes that happen in the environment around people when they have certain emotional states, and trying to see if there's a way that we can measure that and determine if there's a way to help to reduce that. A lot of people who have near-death experiences have after effects of not being able to wear wristwatches. not because it has an effect on them, of having effects on light bulbs and electronic equipment. And the question is, well, how can they reduce this? Because it's a real problem in their lives. And what I'm doing is trying to explain that a little bit better. So perhaps it can help them to find ways that they can eliminate this so they can at least carry cell phones with them again, and not have such high electric bills for blown out light bulbs all the time and things. So.
If you were pressed to speculate on what causes that kind of PK activity from some individuals, what would you say it is?
Well, what I did find with this young boy is that when I taught him techniques to relax, reduce the anxiety, and be mindful of his activities right before these events happen, the events seemed to dissipate. They went away. So it seems, and from the subsequent experiment I did with computers, it seemed that aggravation, anxiety, tended to produce more errors as well. So something that causes high levels of energy or emotional energy, so emotional disturbances, whether it be anxiety, it may also have an effect of joy, may also have the same effect. Ecstasy may have the same effect. I just haven't studied that one yet. It's easier to make people upset than it is to make them really, really happy sometimes,
Put it in their bedrooms.
Right. Well, yes, I don't have any random number generators in my bedroom at home.
Well, do you have any guesses as to what the physical mechanism is that allows my anxiety to mess up the computer? What physiologically, or what's happening in physics terms?
So this is where I go to the bioenergy lab, right? And I start looking to see if there's something that I can measure in the bioenergy lab when people are performing PK activities. Now, I've seen this unintentionally when people are doing healing, or when they're doing, martial arts or something. Unintentionally, this light is produced.
Yeah.
This effect also is occurring on the equipment unintentionally when people are doing certain types of healing. So I don't know if it's the same thing. This is what we need to do. We need to start looking at taking this phenomenon, which most people, if you talk to them in the world, they won't really believe it exists, except we've measured it repeatedly in different situations. So the question is, can we take this and put it in a more controlled environment and learn more about it so we can determine exactly what sort of energy it is? It could be that it's biophotons that are having some sort of effect. It could be some sort of static field that's being generated. Doesn't seem to be, because it seems to happen from a distance as well as from close up. So
yeah, because the rings, the global ring study found that global focus, like on New Year's celebrations or something, affects makes the more coherent outcome from the rings. So that if it involves a whole globe, it's not like a particular kind of photon or something.
Maybe. Maybe. I'm very familiar with Roger's Global Consciousness Project, Roger Nelson's Global Consciousness Project. I've spoken to him quite a bit about it, as you can imagine, because it's not so different than what I'm studying. That is unintentional effects.
Yeah.
Which is similar to what I'm studying. So with that global effect, though, Roger talks about focus in the same direction. When many people are focused on World Cup soccer championship, election results, catastrophes, when everyone becomes focused on the same sort of things, he starts to see effects in the randomness. Reduced randomness is what he sees. Now, his random number generators are quantum-based systems. There's a little quantum process in there. Now, the photomultiplier tube also uses very, very small variations. So there's quantum processes occurring in the photomultiplier tube where I'm measuring light. But the computer system, smoke alarms, kitchen appliances, that's straight up electricity. We're not talking about quantum computers here. I'm talking about more traditional electronic computers. People wearing wristwatches, that's more traditional electronics as well. So there may be something different between these two, but we have to explore it more to understand it. This is where we're going with things.
I think what Roger Nelson told me is that athletic events, like you would think world soccer, because there's so much energy around it, they don't have coherence because there's conflicting views. I want Argentina, I want, Brazil or something. So it doesn't have the kind of coherent effect. It's when people are unified.
Right. Well, if you're talking about, like, for example, there was a few years ago, I thought this was a genius study. There was a man from Japan who got funding from one of the top foundations in parapsychology to study if he went to baseball games with random number generators, would he be able to see effects when his team won versus when they lost? And so he managed to go to every single home game for his team with grant money. I thought this was genius. He didn't get any results, but still, it was just wonderful. He got to go to every baseball game. So, and I agree. So you got so many people pulling for one team, so many pulling from another team.
It cancels out.
You're not going to get a coherence there. But then again, if you have everyone watching a TV or watching a game, you have a sort of coherence there. They're all focused, even if they're not rooting for this team or that team. They're all focused on the same thing. I honestly know that Roger did have some effects on World Cup in the past, but I don't know how extensive it's been. I haven't followed up with that specific area lately.
What do you mean by bioenergy signatures that correspond with psi experiences?
So this is exactly what I was speaking of when I'm talking about healers versus mediums versus martial artists. Looking at their signatures within our photon lab.
And when you talk about mood in computer systems, you mean like if I'm anxious, I could come into your lab and make things.
Or go into your own office and have an effect on the computer system. It's not just my lab. This is the thing. I have a real world working system.
Right.
This is just you might find anywhere.
What's macro and micro PK?
So macro PK is when you're seeing larger objects move, where you can actually see them move. Micro PK is affecting electronics, affecting systems that you can't really see where the effect is coming from. So like spinning the wheel, there's a spectrum, right? If I have some dice in front of me and I make them float up in the air and move around the room and then come down and make a 7, that's macro PK because I can see it, right? If I roll the dice and it comes up a 7 more than it should or whatever number it would be, that's not quite macro because it's not. I can see the result, but there's little forces that are going on that are causing that result. And then there are other things you can't see at all. You can only measure them statistically, like Roger's work with the random number generators. You can only measure them the statistics of the results. So in that case, that's what we call micro. We use these distinctions within parapsychology to help us to describe our experiments to each other. But in reality, it's all mind-matter interaction. It's having an effect on objects in the world.
Have you seen dice float around in the air and come down?
No, I haven't seen that.
Okay.
I have seen some effects that were kind of macro-oriented, but nothing that dramatic.
Yeah. You mentioned in that unconscious psi processes can enhance ESP. What is that about?
The question is what type of activity, what type of psychology causes ESP. I'm not sure where that phrase came from, but the question is whether there are certain psychological states that cause ESP to occur more often than not.
Like schizoopathy.
I'm sorry?
Schizoopathy. I never know how to pronounce it. Christine Simmons Moore is doing research with. There's a certain personality type.
Yeah, she's looking at schizotypes, schizotypy and schizotypes, and she looks at also at synesthesia. Synesthesia is where your senses get confused, or you start to see things that most people hear. Or like you can hear something, but it evokes a sense of color in you, so you have this vision, hearing crossed. That's synesthesia, where different senses cross. But no, that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking more in terms, like Louisa Rhine used to, some of the stories that she collected would be of a mother who would be washing the dishes at home and all of a sudden get a feeling she had to go out immediately and get her child from the yard, and she'd bring the child in, and a few minutes later there'd be a car would come in and crash into the yard. Where the parents are one of the parents have a dream about a baby being crushed by a chandelier, and so they get up and they go and take the baby, and then a few minutes later the chandelier crashes to the ground in the baby's room. These sorts of, what is it about, what type of psychology is involved that causes people to get these experiences? In both of these cases, one of them is a dream situation. It's not conscious, right? It's an unconscious manifestation. And the other, the person is washing, the mother is washing the dishes. This is something where you're not consciously engaged, but you're conscious. But the information seems to come through when there's a routine activity occurring, something that we often call dissociation, where you're unfocused attention on something. So there's some things like this that we might look at to see what's more likely to evoke ESP activity than not. So we have to look at when people experience them, what they're doing when they experience them, and try to understand more about this.
Do you think, have you found that people can be taught to develop their ESP, clairvoyance, healing, precognition, those kind of psi abilities? Can you enhance it or teach it?
I've definitely had some people, and I'm going to stick with my lab work for a minute here, okay?
Sure.
So I've definitely had some people who come into our lab, who, especially in the bioenergy lab, and once they learned what we were looking for and learned how I was measuring and what I was looking for with machines, they were able to give me more what I was looking for. So they were able to change their behaviors or change their mindset and able to produce changes. So they're definitely learning. Definitely having
it's biofeedback.
There's a sense of biofeedback. Yes, they're getting used to the techniques and they're learning about them. Pretty much, well, not everyone I know in the field, but many people I know in the field will tell me that I've been studying this long enough that I've learned enough from different people who are doing it that I can do a little bit of it myself. I'm not a super psychic like Joe McMoneagle who can, see what's going on over in Russia while he's sitting up in Maryland, but, I can at least be able to, know a little bit more about what someone's thinking next to me. I can understand. And I think it has a lot to do with trusting your instincts, learning to trust your instincts and trust your perceptions. Once people start to learn how to do that and start to trust, they'll notice it happening more.
Some people say that the brain is made to filter out a lot of that unconscious information, and because it keeps us from being overwhelmed and allows us to move forward in life. But so you have to kind of how to unlearn some of that filtering in order to be more conscious of the psi input.
Yes, some people talk about the fact that they believe psi is devolving, essentially. That psi was something that was much more present in the past, much more needed when we were living in situations where danger was more around us. Now we control so much of our environment, even the climate. We control it indoors, and it's so easy for us to forget that there was a time where tigers might jump out and eat you, and the person who had any sort of inkling that this was about to occur had an advantage over someone who didn't.
And their genes would be passed on.
Yes, and so there would be a selection, natural selection that would go on that would encourage that type of thing. But since we are not in those sort of situations anymore, that is devolving, I tend not to adhere to that philosophy, because I believe that people who follow their instincts, follow their intuitions, tend to be more successful in other ways as well. And so I believe that it's still very, very present in our culture. I think there are still people who, and it wasn't so long ago that it would be completely wiped out of our evolutionary tree yet. So I think that will continue to exist and continue to develop. Now the question is, why do some people recognize it more than others? You talk to Jim Carpenter about first sight theory, and first sight theory, we use it all the time. It's part of our normal psychological processing, our decision-making process. There was a theory called PMIR, psi-mediated instrumental response theory, that was about the fact that every decision we make is mediated or informed by psi information that we're getting from things that are around us. If you consider that, then yeah, we're all using it all the time. But some people tend to be able to know when they're using it and be more conscious about it. This is more because of the fact that they're not blocking themselves from knowing. They're allowing themselves to have access to this information when it comes in. But the person who is more sensitive and more aware of that are typically more sensitive and more aware of a lot of things in their lives. Not just related to psi, but related to people's feelings, people's emotions, the processes that are going on around them, everything about the world. They tend to be more aware of all of these things. Psi is just one of those things that they tend to be aware of.
And they're probably NFs on the Myers-Briggs.
Oh, well, that would be your game, not mine.
Okay. You've also done some work with remote viewers?
Yeah, well, yes. A few years ago, I know quite a few remote viewers, quite a few people who were in the Stargate program, including Paul Smith, Joe McMoneagle, Ed May, Doug Graff, many people who were part of that program. And I know a lot of people who have done remote viewing in this area as well. So we've done some studies related to, well, honestly, we're trying to make money. We were for research purposes. We had psychics trying to make money for more research. So we're organized the Associative Remote Viewing project here. We ended up not making money, but it was because of the facts we had issues with the investment process, not with the actual remote viewing process. But it brought us to a new understanding, and I presented a paper last year about this, that one of the things that's really important when you're dealing with remote viewing is you have people who have to do judging of whether it's a hit or a miss or which target they got, things like this. And there's no real standard on how to do that. There's no training on how to do this. And so if we don't start focusing on this, we're never going to really know how well people are doing in remote viewing. Because they might do really well, but if the judge gets it wrong, we've lost a whole session because of that. So that's one of the things that we have to start focusing on a bit more, is target sets, how the targets are determined, how the judges determine if it's a hit or not, what's an appropriate target for a viewer, what's likely to be viewed appropriately when we're dealing with remote viewing. This will help us across the board, but it'll also help us with associated remote viewing, usually where there's some sort of monetary gain to be had with it. So.
Charles Tart had a really interesting point that you could remote view people's emotional, mental problems. So you could kind of find the origins or see what was going on to help them get more healthy, which was, I never thought of that.
Charlie is an extremely intuitive person, if you haven't noticed.
And you know, there's only 2 people that were sensing on the Myers-Briggs, and he's one of them, rather than intuitive. Isn't that interesting?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
I couldn't figure that out. What is GESP protocols?
General ESP. It's ESP, but general ESP. You know, when you talk about ESP, we talk about telepathy, clairvoyance, and precognition. Those are ESP. When you try to study it, you can say, well, I'm studying telepathy. But if you really look at it, you can't determine if it's telepathy or precognition or maybe clairvoyance. These things start to get so mixed up, and you could argue that it's one versus another. We stop that argument and just say it's general ESP. So when I'm talking about general ESP protocols, I'm talking about the Ganzfeld Are you familiar with the Ganzfeld? Okay. So I have a group of young researchers that I'm mentoring right now, and I gave them a choice of different projects to work on, and they picked the Ganzfeld, trying to integrate Ganzfeld protocol with research work that's been done since the 1990s on remote viewing, and bringing these two together because they haven't been brought together in the past.
No, how are they doing that?
We're designing a Ganzfeld process that doesn't have a sender, but instead allows it to be just remote viewed from a distance.
But who picks the target?
And utilizing the remote viewing knowledge that's been gained in remote viewing about targets, about judging, about displacement, and trying to eliminate that from the Ganzfeld protocol. So they're redesigning the Ganzfeld to try to make it more accessible, easier to use, and to make it more likely to be successful based on everything we've learned in parapsychology over the years.
Okay, so Ganzfeld, I think I'm in a quiet room, I have ping pong balls over my eyes, I'm listening to white noise, I'm just kind of receptive and being tuned in. Then I say, okay, I'm getting this image, and then we see if that is close to the target that the computer selected. Is that your
pretty close?
Then
yeah.
What does remote viewing have to do with that? I don't understand.
So when you're dealing with either the Ganzfeld or remote viewing, you're looking at, can a person perceive information that is not available to them through their senses? What is that target that we're using? In both cases, if you're doing a scientific study, you have a selection of targets. What should that target be? In remote viewing, typically it's a photograph, a picture. Sometimes it's somebody going to a location, but most of the time it's a picture that's in an envelope or an object that might be in another room or something like this. But research in the Ganzfeld demonstrated very clearly those are horrible targets. Videos are much better targets because they're active, there's motion, and our minds tend to respond to those. And so using video targets are that's a much better targeting system. Also, in the Ganzfeld, after the video plays and the person then sees 4 videos, and they have to pick one of the 4 videos. That one matches what I was seeing. This is anathema when it gets to remote viewing. You never show a remote viewer any of the decoys. You only show them the target. Because if you show multiple targets, they're going to pick the most interesting one, whether it was the one you picked or not. They're going to say, I like that one. That's the one that I'm going to pick. And so you have to combine the knowledge we've gained from remote viewing and the knowledge we've gained from the Ganzfeld and bring them together to make a single protocol. This hasn't been done before. So it was very creative for this group to decide to take this path. And we've been working on it for a while. We're about to start some tests with it. As soon as I get the software written, it should be done hopefully within the next couple months. So.
And then, so the person in the relaxed state, they maybe have 4 video clips that they have to pick from the 4 clips. Oh, this is what I.
No, that's the thing you do not want to do. You don't want to show them any more. You only want to show them the one video clip that is the feedback for what was playing in the other room. You don't show them the other ones. And
they say, oh, yeah, that's what I saw. Oh, no, I didn't see that.
No, we tell them that's the one that was in the other room. We have a transcript of everything they just said, and we have the target.
Oh, and then the judge says how much they match.
An independent judge.
Yeah.
Makes a decision.
Got it.
So the judge sees decoys, but the viewer never sees, or the participant in the Ganzfeld never sees it.
Right.
So, but like I said, there's knowledge we've gained from both these fields, but they've never been brought together.
Oh, interesting.
So trying to enhance our general ESP testing mechanisms is by bringing these together. And this is just one area that we can do this. There's a lot of basic foundational work within this field that has never been done because, well, it's only interesting if you're really trying to do the basic science. It's not so interesting if you're trying to convince the world that it's real, if you're trying to get interesting funding activity. But trying to do the foundational work is so important for us to move forward as an organization and as a field.
Have you thought about, I'm sure you have, writing a book about all these Rhine experiments? Because I know you've written lots of papers.
Yeah, I've written some papers, and yeah, I've got some ideas on books, but I need to do the research first. I felt like I had to get some studies under my belt and get some things published before I could actually pull things together. But as you can tell, there's some pieces that do seem to naturally coalesce, at least in my mind. They seem to naturally coalesce into a topic. So there does seem to be something we could grow with.
Yeah. Just a few more questions. The quantum physics is so tempting to say, well, psi works because entangled particles affect each other non-locally. But physicists say, oh no, you can't use quantum physics. We don't know enough about it to say that. What's your view about that?
Did you talk to Ed May?
He won't. He wouldn't.
Oh, okay. Well, yeah, Ed May is going to say no, it's not real. It doesn't happen that way. There's two phenomena in quantum physics that I tend to focus on. One is the observer effect, and the idea that the wave-particle duality depends upon whether you're looking for a particle or not.
Right.
This is a demonstration very clearly in quantum physics, has nothing to do with parapsychology. It's very clear that the act of observation, the intention to observe the world, has an effect on how the world behaves. So intention, conscious attention, has an effect. That's very important, and that is underlying all of our research in parapsychology as well. We have to consider that, and not only parapsychology, all of our research in sciences ever.
Right.
When you talk about entanglement, entanglement is a demonstration of non-locality.
Yeah.
It's a demonstration that we cannot find a signal, and we cannot even conceive of a signal that would enable this to happen. We can't detect it, we can't block it, and we can't conceive of what it might be that would cause instantaneous correlation between these events occurring. Some psi seems to also operate that way. It seems also to operate in non-local ways where it'll happen here and there, but nothing in between. You can't see anything in between. Does that mean that entanglement is the mechanism that's being used? I won't go there. I won't go that far. What we tend to do as human beings, if we find something that we don't understand, and we find something else we don't understand, we tend to think maybe they're like similar or the same. And so this is why people who don't really understand what we study in parapsychology, they oftentimes group into it Bigfoot, aliens, crop circles, because they don't understand any of it. So they say, well, it must all be the same thing. You guys should study all of it. But no, they're very different things. I think the same way with quantum physics. There are things we don't understand really well. We don't know how it works. We don't know how psi works. It doesn't mean they work the same way. But there seems that there's something that we're seeing something here and we're seeing something there. Maybe we will find a connection. But I would never say that that entanglement describes how it works until we can actually demonstrate that.
Right.
I got that little scientist who sits on my shoulder, and every once in a while he kicks me and says, don't go there. And so that's where my limits are related to this. There could be a connect, but it's not demonstrated yet.
Right. One of the points of the book is that people like you are creating, I want to say, a new paradigm for science, but actually it's very old and very Eastern to include mind and consciousness. Can you say, do you think that a new paradigm is being created that includes the observer effect and all of that?
I think there are some sciences that are starting to recognize that the ground that they're standing on is less firm than they thought it was in the past. And they're starting to recognize that they have to look in other directions in order to find answers. And consciousness seems to be integrated into our experience in some way. And so people are exploring it in more detail. Parapsychology and the phenomena we study is just one example of that. There are other examples as well, but it's one example of that has been studied scientifically, has been very carefully controlled and demonstrated. And as soon as people start looking at the existing literature, they will see how solid it is and how it really does demonstrate the phenomena. We still haven't gotten over the hump of how, though. We can say, yes, it happens, but how does it happen? The process behind it, we're still mushy there. And this is, I hope, where some other graduate students will start getting involved and starting to build their own way into making this a reality.
It was encouraging to me that Harvard is doing a placebo research project, because I think that kind of will lead in some of these directions.
Well, yes, and I know that Bill Bengtson has been doing work with placebo as well. So there's a number of people who are starting to look at placebo. I mean, it's always been dismissed.
I know.
As just the placebo
just
effect.
Placebo. 40% is not just.
Right. Well, even so, it's like this person just got healed because they thought they were going to get healed. Nothing really happened. Like, they got healed. Can't we just focus on that? Let's stick with that.
The amazing thing to me about placebo is, even if someone knows that it's just a sugar pill, if you say this has helped other people in the past, it's a sugar pill, but then they get better, even knowing that it's just, right. The mind is amazing. What I don't understand is why there's so much resistance, and with so little research. People feel very comfortable saying, oh, psi phenomena doesn't exist. They don't bother to read the double-blind, triple-blind studies. They just say it's hogwash, it's parapsychology, it's pseudoscience. But there's a lot of passion in the put-downs. And I wonder if you have any explanation why universities shy away from it so much. Academics.
Well, yeah, I have some ideas on that. There are people over at Duke who are in the university or academics in the university who support us, who come occasionally to our research meetings to spend time here, have discussions with us. Some have even written kind of parapsychology papers, but not really parapsychology papers. And they will not. They won't join our organization. We can't talk about them because it would ruin their academic career. Now, I have to say, one of the longest term professors at Duke University, a man named Bill Joins, is in their engineering department. He's been studying parapsychology since the 70s, and he's still doing research with me now on the biophoton lab. That was his lab initially that I took over from, and I've been working with. So Bill is someone who's been out from the beginning, but he's also written engineering textbooks on light, and he still teaches quite a bit. Many people, not just scientists, not just academics, but many people subscribe to a materialistic worldview because this is how we've been raised, it's how we've been brought up, and a reductionist point of view. Whereas if you don't understand it, you just got to look at the littler pieces. Once you start looking at littler pieces, eventually we'll get down to the smallest particles. And if we look at those smallest particles and how they react with each other and bounce off each other, we'll be able to describe these larger phenomena that are going on. And if you believe in this, you're kind of believing that there is a deterministic aspect to the world. If you believe these little particles bouncing off each other and following these laws are going to lead to these larger activities, well, then you're seeing a causality at the smallest level that's kind of in action and will just continue until all of those activities play out, until everything stops. This is a deterministic situation. If there's no choices, if the laws are set, And this has worked really well for many people across the world. We have bridges, we have planes, we have rocket ships. We have so much because of engineers. My brother and my dad were both engineers. They built roads, they built bridges, they built big machines and devices. This is what they did with their lives. So it works really well. But on the other hand, there's some things that don't fit that model. How can we look at this stuff and say, oh, but what you've built and everything, that's not the end of it. There's more. They say, no, there can't be. Look, it works so well, and you can't break my model. My materialistic model is what works has been so successful. If you do something outside of the materialistic model, and you're saying, hey, that's not real, or there's uncertainty in there, why don't all the bridges fall down? Why don't the planes well, I shouldn't go there. But but you know what? Why aren't we having more problems with our physical structure and our physical lives? Our phones work. They wouldn't work if it was all uncertainty. So this is why people have issues with it. But when we really look at it, there is uncertainty everywhere. And expectation has such a large effect on things. It's hard for people to accept that because, their worldview doesn't accommodate it. They would have to really change their whole mind. We see this so much, not only in the sciences these days, but we see it so much in the way that people treat each other, in the way governments operate, the way people think, the United States is the best country in the world. Look, we're amazing at so many things, but when you travel, when you see the world, you realize, well, there's other people who do things really well that are a hell of a lot different than the way we do them. Why would we think we're the best? It's a worldview. And you can't violate that worldview or people start getting upset. It starts getting under their skin. And they'll fight you without ever having traveled. They'll tell you the United States is the best place in the world. And it'll be a strong pushback from them. See the same thing in the sciences. Without ever investigating and seeing the other side of the coin, they're pushing back from their position because they hold on to it so strongly.
Two more questions. People are concerned about climate change, increasing economic inequality, the rise of autocrats. As a scientist and a well-educated person, are you optimistic or pessimistic about our survival as a species? I mean, they say we have 12 years to turn around climate change. That's kind of scary.
Well, I guess I have two answers to that. One is my belief system includes a belief in existence beyond physical, and so the end of a physical reality is not an end to me. It's just a change. At the same time, so I don't know if you would call that optimistic or pessimistic or realistic or whatever you would do. But then on the other side of it, I would say I'm a parapsychologist. I'm obviously an optimist. I think that I can actually make a living and succeed in sciences, pushing the edges of reality. I have to be optimistic. Anybody who's in this field has to have a sense of optimism and continuing to go further. So when it comes to all these types of phenomena, or these types of activities and things, things change slowly. I would like them to change more quickly. I would like to see us have more compassion for each other because there's no difference between us. I would like to see us working together rather than holding onto a position so strongly that we have to push against another. I would like to see us considering nonviolent resolution. And sometimes it takes longer to get there, but eventually we'll all get there. Eventually. It's a question of whether the planet will survive with humans on it. The planet will survive. It's just, are humans going to be able to live here? And are we going to have the same sort of society that we have now? Well, I don't think we're at quite the tipping point yet for me personally to have to deal with that on a daily basis. Doesn't mean I'm not, I don't use single-use plastics. I try to avoid that as much as possible. I try to do everything I can to limit my travel, and I'm very cautious about how I live in the world. At the same time, I'm going to take a plane out to Colorado to meet with my friends and to have a conference on parapsychology later in the year. I'm going to do these things. So, and I have baggies in my drawer at home. It's just convenient. It's not something that I like. I try to reuse them, but still I have them. So I do. I'm not at a point now where it's not the zombie apocalypse yet. For me personally. But there are things that we do have to be very conscious of and very careful of. And I definitely believe that there are policy shifts that need to be made. And we need to be advocates for policy changes to try to live a sustainable life in a cooperative way with every living being on the planet.
What's exciting to me is that young people are getting it. Like the Swedish teenager Greta Thunberg and the student strike, they're saying, come on, we can't delay this any longer. We have to deal with this problem. That's encouraging to me.
Yeah, I'm happy that she's gotten a stage and she was able to express herself the way she was.
Yeah.
And so strongly. It's like all the high school students down in Florida after the shooting that was down there coming out and making a point. You guys if you guys aren't standing up with us, then it's going to happen again. And these were the kids standing up and saying this because the adults wouldn't do it.
Right.
So I'm happy that people are taking that step.
Yeah, me too. Last question. It would be tempting to be in the lab 24/7. What do you do for fun? You mentioned you're getting together with friends. And anything else that you use to kind of stay balanced?
Well, I have to say, since I've been associated with the Rhine for the past few years, it's really absorbed a lot of my energy and my time. And especially since I started the Rhine Education Center and the online school that we have, and teaching courses and recruiting students and continuing to find instructors for the school and the education aspect is just so rewarding. That I can't find any other way to really kind of progress without focusing on that. I definitely have fun with the people I see here and to work with. It's not heads down, always in the lab behind a data screen. I like looking at data too. It's weird, but yes, whenever I start doing statistical work, I fight it, and then when I do it, it's like, wow, I like doing this. But really interacting with people is really where I find it, and it doesn't matter. I honestly tried to create an environment here that is inclusive enough and enough of a community that we can feel like we don't have to get away from it to have fun. Mm. We can have this where we can be together, we can do things we like to do, and there are times where I just won't talk about parapsychology with people here. We talk about music, we talk about TV, we talk about movies, anything that we can find to keep things going. As I said, I'm not the kind of guy who's going to go out rock climbing or anything like that, but I definitely like my distractions.
How many people work at Rhine now?
Well, we have a small staff. It's just that there's 3 of us here who actually are in the office, but we have quite a number of associated researchers and volunteers who are with us here. So
anything that we've left out that you think should be included?
I talk about the Rhine in terms of 3 pillars, and one is research, education, and community. And I think we've touched on research in a lot of detail. Education, I told you about the Education Center. We also have online, we have events that we do here where we have speakers come in and talk about either their research or their different experiences, and we broadcast these live online. And we have videos of these in our video library on our website. If you get a chance to see that, all the people that you're talking to and other people are in our video library because they've come to the Rhine in the past. So I have different lectures that are up there. And then finally is the community. And the community is really just a place where people can feel comfortable speaking about their own experiences, learning from other people about their experiences, and speaking in a safe environment where they're going to be able to feel comfortable without being ridiculed or being outed as somebody who's weird or strange.
Crazy.
Right. Well, we all have a little bit of that going on, but we all know that we have that going on here, so we're okay. So, those are the three things I talk about related to the Rhine.
Great, thanks.